Because if your leaders are like, I'm not going to make time for anybody who's lower down in the org chart to come talk to me, that's its own problem, right? I mean, that's a problem you got to work on. Leaders have to be open to talking to people about their careers and opportunities and what their department does.
Welcome to Voice Activated, the podcast dedicated to unlocking the power of employee feedback. I'm Sean Fitzpatrick, founder of TalentMap and your host. In each episode, we'll dive into real-world examples and best practices, as well as some lessons learned from employee surveys, pulse checks, focus groups, 360s, and more. If people are at the heart of your business, you're in the right place. Expect open conversations, practical advice, inspiring stories from companies that are getting it right, and some reflections from those who've hit a few bumps along the way. Tune in, listen up, and let's activate the voice of your employees. Compensation is a big part of employee engagement. Done right, it seldom shows up as an engagement driver, but done wrong, it certainly can cause a lot of people to leave and leave in droves. In fact, our company, TalentMap, saw this coming out of COVID when the compensation expectations around inflation, cost of living ratcheted up. Not all clients were able to make the adjustment or did it quickly, and they started to lose people. But it might not have been the only reason why they were losing it, but it was certainly an indicator. You know, all of the exit data we do in terms of collecting data from companies and employee engagement data we often don't see compensation as a driver of engagement. But when we analyze it for intent to change employers or intent to leave, comp always comes up or often comes up as number one or number two. And along with career growth or professional development also being number one or number two of why people leave. So they're often tied together, which is quite interesting. Today's guests believe retention's a lot more than just fair pay and benefits. He sees retention really as a human decision, one that's rooted in relationships, fairness, and whether people are seen in their day-to-day work. Greg Roche is a founder of Retention Rewards Partner and a longtime leader in total reward strategy. He led comp and ben programs through many merger and acquisitions, transformation, and cultural shifts. But he's also the creator of the Introverted Network, a coaching platform that helps people build real connections at work. In this episode, we'll explore why retention isn't just about compensation. It's about integration. It's about trust. And we'll talk about how organizations are developing systems to help employees foster authentic relationships, to create the kind of culture people don't want to leave. Greg, welcome to Voice Activated.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. It's good to be on the show here.
Oh, good. Well, just before we dive into some of the questions I'd like to ask, just tell me a little bit about how did you end up in this sort of mix between comp and people and culture? It's an interesting space and it's a challenging space, but tell me sort of how you ended up here.
I started out in HR a little over 20 years ago. I didn't go to school for it. It wasn't where I started my career. I actually started my career in consulting. Came out of college and worked for, at the time, it was called Anderson Consulting, if I'm dating myself there, which is now Accenture. So started out there, process analyst. I was actually helping to implement SAP at the end of the 1900s, before the year 2000, for those of you who remember that period of time. So got into consulting, sort of looking at problems, how to solve process problems, moved into another company that was focused on their operations. So did a lot of process operations stuff and was really digging into metrics and analytics. And I had a friend in HR who said, we're really going to start looking at our HR processes and the analytics and all this stuff behind it. And so we'd like you to come over to HR and do some of the stuff you've done for operations. And I was like, sounds good. What's the role? What's the title? And he said, it's Director of Retention. And I said, okay, I don't really know what that is, but sure, sounds good. Let's go try it out. So I still contend, I don't think I've ever met anybody else who's ever been the Director of Retention for a company. I think I might have been the only person who's ever had that title, but I could be wrong. I'm sure there's somebody out there. But
you certainly don't hear it all that often as a title out there. No. Yeah, but it's an important one, right?
It actually is, and it's where I started. And the good thing about having someone dedicated to that is everybody's role is everybody has retention as part of their role, right? Retention is everybody's job. But because it's everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And so having one person do it and focus on that really allowed me to look at all the processes within the people life cycle. We were talking about it as an employee life cycle, a talent life cycle. By looking at all those pieces and seeing where people were exiting, we were able to really zero in on what was maybe going wrong in that process. And so it was very analytics focused. It was very much thinking of the life cycle as a process. And we were employing sort of lean methodologies and all those sort of measurements to it. And then as I kind of grew in that role, I took on the analytics function. I took on HRIS. I started to get into performance management. So at this company, my role was kind of expanding, and it allowed me to get into the different functional areas of HR. And finally, I got to the point of where I was over the comp and benefits team. And that's really where I started to get exposed to the total rewards function within that organization. So I always tell people I came in to HR through the data and just kind of grew up through the data, and then got into comp and benefits and have been doing that for over 15 years now.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a neat transition from operations process into human resources, and it's a different one. You often see people come in, they start in a comp and ben or a payroll type of thing and move into it. So it probably gives you a unique perspective for sure. Uh, so you've led some comp and reward, organizations and different aspects of it, and often you talk a lot about the importance of total rewards and being, transparent and open about that. How do you talk about total rewards? What is it? What's it mean? What is that concept of a total rewards? Because most people often think about it as what I take home, my salary.
Yeah, in the traditional term of the word total rewards, there are typically two parts. There is the compensation, and then there's the benefits. So when somebody says head of total rewards, you're probably going to oversee both of those functions, likely. A lot of people are in one or the other, right? So compensation being your base pay, what you take home in your paycheck every 2 weeks or every month, your bonus potentially, if your company has a bonus program, if there's a long-term incentive plan, they help with that. So it's money that comes to you in some form at different times of the year. And how do you structure that and manage that in a fiscally responsible way for the organization, and also keep it competitive with the external market so that you keep the people that you've got and you can attract the ones you want. The benefits piece of it is managing all those programs, the medical, dental, vision, the short-term, long-term disability, life insurance, 401k, and a lot of times the wellness programs will roll up into that benefits function. And, that's going to be much more of I tend to think of that as very sort of almost like supply chain vendor management focused, right? You have a ton of external partners. You have priorities within your organization on what's important, and you're trying to put together the best set of benefits that your employees will value and want to participate in. And so those two roles, those two pieces together, typically are items 1 and 2 in terms of size on a company's P&L under the expense part, right? So those are typically the two biggest expenses a company will have, and especially if it's a service-based organization. And so when you're leading total rewards, you have a very big, again, financial responsibility to make sure that you're managing those programs in a way that the company can sustain, but that also remains competitive. So it's always this balance, because you always could say like, well, if we spent more money on pay, we could keep people, but if you spend too much on pay, you're not even going to have a company to keep them at, right? I mean, you've still got to remain profitable, and your CFO and your finance team is going to have a very focused eye on your programs to make sure that you are not overspending or spending more than they are taking in from a revenue perspective. So So it tends to be one of those functions that a lot of people, when they get into HR, I've heard tons of people over the years say, oh, I would never want to be in total rewards. I'd never want to be in comp and benefits. So it's a little bit different, I would say, person that gets into those. And typically once people get in, they tend to stay in. And usually they stay in one or the other. There's not a ton of people in the world that cross both. And so it makes it a sort of a rare skill to lead those combined teams. But if it's something that you're into, it also is a very sort of in demand skill. So I've always enjoyed doing, and a lot of times I've done comp or I've done benefits. Sometimes I do both. It just really depends on the size of the company. And either one of them, I enjoy doing both, but it's kind of just depends on what the company needs. Yeah.
A lot of your work, in practice has been around the numbers, the comp, the transaction, making sure it's paid fairly and so on. But you talk a lot about, how to build trust, how to ensure that organizations feel, employees feel a relationship to each other, to peers, to the organization. Those two things seem different. They seem almost diametrically opposed to each other. So how did you bridge that gap, or how did you come to that realization that maybe there's more to this whole area around engagement and retention than just data and numbers?
I would be the person that, let's say in this hypothetical situation, Dan, who's the head of a business unit, would come to my office on a monthly or weekly basis, somebody like Dan, and would say, oh my gosh, we got to put together a counteroffer for Jennifer. She's just put in her resignation. She's my top performer. I can't afford to lose her. And of course, I would say, Dan, we will do whatever we can. We'll try to put together something that's competitive. But honestly, she's already gone. She left 2 or 3 months ago, when whatever was happening 2 or 3 months ago pushed her over the edge to take a phone call from a recruiter, or to go online and look at jobs, or to just start talking to her network saying, I got to do something different. Because when somebody comes in with their resignation and they say, hey, I got another offer, and Dan comes and asks me to counter it, a lot of things had to happen to get to that point. And so as I encountered all my Dans through my career, I started really thinking about what are all those steps that it takes to get to that offer and that resignation. Because before you get an offer, you had to have some interviews with a company. And before you had that final interview, you had a bunch of interviews with other people. And before those interviews, you had an interview with a recruiter. But before that recruiter could talk to you, they had to get your information, whether they looked you up and made a phone call or you submitted an application. They had to get it and look at it and decide they wanted to call you. And before all that happened, you had to make a decision that I'm ready to look somewhere else. Like, whatever's going on right now at work, I would rather take on the uncertainty of what's going to happen in this process, because I don't know I'm going to get an offer. I don't know I'm going to get a job. But I know that even that uncertainty is better than whatever's happening today. And I refer to that as crossing the line, right? I like to mentally picture a person standing at a white line, and they're not jumping off the edge, because again, they might reach out to somebody and they don't get back to them. So they might take a step over that line, but they might come back. But the fact that they're at that line, at that point where they're ready to make a decision to do something else, that comes from, maybe too much work or not being communicated with from their leaders, or not trusting the organization. It's all these little things that push somebody to that line, to where they finally take that step over. And once they do that, that's what leads them down that path to that offer. So as I thought about that, I always thought, usually when they're standing at that line, the thing that makes them step over it, it's not on Friday when they get their paycheck. It's Monday morning when they come in and their boss is like, hey, we got a whole new project. You're going to have to put everything you are doing on hold, and we're going to change our priorities, and your whole world is changing. Oh yeah, we're going to work a whole lot more. And I'm sorry that's happened, but that's how it goes. Or, you know, somebody else is moving forward with that promotion that they didn't get and nobody told them why. It's all those little things. And so for me, I think total rewards is hugely important to an organization. Like I said, it's usually the two big expenses, and it's what we use to attract and retain the people we want. But it doesn't matter how much you pay them. If they feel disconnected from the organization, if they don't feel like they belong in the organization, if it's just worse being at the organization than it is going out and trying to find something new, then nothing you pay them is going to keep them. And so you have to focus on how can we build better connections within our organization so that when somebody's feeling like that, they have somebody they can turn to and go, man, work has been tough this week. It's really been a struggle and I'm not feeling it. I'm feeling like I'm standing at this line. And that person can often talk to you and give you an ear to lay your sort of troubles on and maybe help you get a little perspective or think about it differently, or just the act of being able to vent to somebody who understands it is helpful. And I know once I started kind of talking about this with some of my coworkers and sharing this idea, I would have them, they would walk in my office and say, today's been tough. I'm at the line. Like, I need you to talk to me. And I would, talk to them and we would I would really just listen. Like, what's going on? What's happening? Tell me what it is. And then usually once you've talked about it to somebody and they've listened, you're kind of like, okay, maybe I've talked it out. I feel a little bit better. I might have solved my own problem. But not having that, the person you're going to talk to is that recruiter. The person you're going to talk to is that person that works at some other company. So creating those connections gives you some place to go when you're feeling that way. But it also gives you, people within the organization that you can work with better, right? You collaborate better when you know people, when you have relationships, when you're more than a name in the from line on the email. You talk to each other, you work things out, you solve problems faster. So I'm a big advocate for people learning how to network internally within the organization, and as a way to learn about the organization, learn about other opportunities, and also for the organization to learn about them and improve talent mobility. I mean, if you're known to other leaders in the organization and they've got an opportunity and they're like, I've met Greg. I think he's great. It seems like he's doing good work over there. We've talked. He seems like a good guy. I would love to bring him on my team. You start to foster this talent mobility where, we usually have a big group of executives sit around in a room and they're like, well, what's our bench look like? Who's our talent? And I mean, I've been in some of those rooms and I know we get to somebody's name on the list and everybody goes, I don't really know them. I mean, what do they do? And so, no matter how awesome that person is, how great they are, how skilled they might be, if nobody knows who they are, it's going to be tough for them to move around the organization.
That's it. I want to dive into that a little bit around that internal networking and how you help or how you could, think about that for people within organizations, because that's really critical. And it's a neat way to think about, building out those relationships that are, easier, hopefully, for managers to help. Before I do that, I want to go back to Dan, or these Dans that come in. Often, obviously, when they're coming to your door, they're thinking, or are they just hoping? Do they already know that the person's gone? Or are they thinking, oh, well, we can really keep them if we just get the comp right and, counteroffer them? I guess, what do you say to those managers that just think, oh, we just got to pay them more and that will solve this issue or this challenge? How do you coach those managers to start to think of, because what if you do the counteroffer, it doesn't work, and Dan could be back in 3 months with the next one in terms of that. So I guess what do you say to those managers?
I always say, if we counter them and they stay, you should be looking for this person's replacement right away. You should spend the next 6 months looking for this person's replacement, because they're going to leave. Because they probably, the unfortunate thing, somebody comes back with their resignation and they say, well, what if they say, here's what I got, here was the offer, they're probably going to then turn around and use your counter to try to get more out of the new company that's trying to get them. And then, if they're highly focused on the money and that's all that's important to them, then they're going to go with the highest offer. But that they're going to get another offer down the road anyway, right? And if they stay, right, now you've got this weird situation where, they threatened to leave, you capitulated. You're basically admitting, I didn't really appreciate you or focus on you, but I need you. So how's that situation going to play out? So I would just say if they do stay, expect they're going to leave. And I do think also that many of these executives don't expect them to stay, but you can't not fight to get them to stay. It looks bad on you as a leader if you don't go. If somebody says so-and-so left and it's like, well, did we try to save them? And you go, no, I didn't do anything. You look really bad in front of your peers. And I mean, I've seen that, and I've seen at a really high level, the person was like, they're not going to stay anyway. Don't worry about it. And then their superior came back and was like, no, you make the offer. I don't care if they don't stay. We've got to show that we fought for this person. Because otherwise you're just capitulating. You're just like, oh, well, whatever. So I think sometimes they know they're not going to stay, but they have to make their best run at it in order to, look good as a leader. But yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of pay that people need. And so I think in most companies, they're not going to be so far out of the market that people are just like leaving and they don't know it's pay. You may not be leading the market. You may not be lagging the market. You might be somewhere right in the middle, which most companies are, right? Everybody's kind of right around the median, right around the 50th. And you're not like I'll come into companies, I'll work with them and they're like, we don't know if we're paying competitively. I was like, well, like, are you hiring people? And they're like, well, yeah. Okay. Are people kind of staying? I mean, you might have some turnover. And they're like, well, yeah. I was like, well, if you were really far off, you would not be keeping people. You would not hire people. Like your recruiting team would tell you, like, we are way out of the market. Like every candidate we talk to is like, no way. So you kind of already know. I think it's, what people really want to know is, are we overpaying? Right? Are we paying more than everybody else? And maybe you are, and maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe that's part of your comp philosophy is that you want to lead the market. But most companies, unless you're a really well-known name, high-end tech company, your Apples, your now all your AI companies, they're like, we're going top dollar because that's what I got to do. But most companies are not going to be doing that. So, again, it's important, right? I mean, people trade their time for a paycheck and for all the other things that come with it. And you get to a level where it just becomes more of a hygiene factor. And the stuff that's really going to keep people really going to want to make them stay is all those other things like career growth and trust. And I feel good here and I'm connected and I can come to work and not be worried about, am I going to get yelled at today? Or am I going to fail in this meeting? Or am I set up to fail in this project? They want to feel comfortable and good at work. And those are all the things above and beyond the total rewards that really are the things that make the difference.
You touched on, I thought was really interesting, helping employees network within the organization and build relationships beyond just maybe their day-to-day team. And because when I initially was getting to know you and getting to know your material, I thought that's what you were thinking of, but you sort of indicated, part of what you do is help employees build those relationships and what, so it gives them more mobility, gets them known outside of their day-to-day circle. So I'd like you to just talk a little bit more. What are the tools? What are the processes? What are ways that you could share that could help people to think that way?
I think this has become more of a problem in the last 5 or 6 years for a number of reasons, right? So obviously we had a whole, I'll call it generation, not quite a whole generation of workers, but like a lot of people in 2020 and forward, when everybody went home to work or, now started to come back to hybrid, now return to office, you had a whole bunch of people who kind of came into the workplace and never really got the experience of what it means to work in a team, in a group of people in an office. And this is not me saying everybody needs to return to office, but there are unwritten etiquette rules or unwritten ways of doing things at work. And you don't learn those any other way than by showing up and observing and learning. And one of those things is, how do you get to know the other people that you work with? And of course, you're going to know your team. Of course, you're going to know your boss. Maybe you know your boss's boss. But in work, you interact with a lot of other departments. So for me, in compensation and benefits, and I'll just focus on compensation, key people for me to know really well, the payroll department, okay? Because we process bonuses, we process pay changes. If I don't have a good relationship with the payroll department, when I mess something up, and they're the ones that are going to have to fix it for me, if they've never talked to me and they've never met me and I just show up and say like, hey, I got a problem, they're probably not going to be really going out of their way to help me out. But if we've talked and I've gone to them and said, hey, I really think that, it's important that I understand your priorities and what's important to you. Help me be a better partner to you and tell me what you need from compensation. The fact that I even asked, now I'm like their favorite comp partner ever. But then, finance is another one. So you ask like, how do you do that? I think the key is you have to think about, who do I interact with on a day-to-day basis? Who sends me an email? Like, again, who are the froms that I get? And who are the people on other teams that send them to me? And what are they asking for? And then it's intentionally talking to those people about non-work stuff. And I'm not saying you're digging into their personal lives and things like that, but getting to that conversation and being like, hey, we've kind of interacted at work. I would really like to just spend 15, 30 minutes talking to you about, how'd you get to the role you're in? How did you get into payroll? How did you get into finance? How did you get, what's your journey? How'd you get there? And showing interest in them as a person and not just another name that sends you stuff via email or Slack or Teams or whatever. I really just like talking to them and get to know them. And this sounds really basic, right? But these are the conversational skills that I feel like we are getting worse at. The more technology comes into the workplace, we are getting worse at being human. We're getting worse at conversation. We've got, and look, I got two kids, one's 22, one's 18. And we were talking about this the other night. Like, they're like grew up texting and messaging, and it's like abbreviations and it's fine for them because they're like, well, that's how people talk that are my age. Okay. But when you start to get into the working world, it's more of a conversation. It's more of a, who are you? What's going on? Tell me about you. Help me understand what's important to you and how I can help you. And then they're like, great. What's important to you? And now we've both had this conversation where now we know what's important to each other, and we start to know who that other person is. And then that starts to build some trust. Now I trust this person's not just going to leave me hanging. They're not going to throw me under the bus. Probably. I mean, they might, but you hope they don't. You're trying to lessen that. And then, but hey, look, if you've gone out of your way to intentionally talk to some people and build these relationships across the organization, if they do throw you under the bus, then you're like, hey man, what's going on? Like, why did that happen? And they might tell you something like, it was from higher up, and I had to do this, and but at least you can go have that conversation. Whereas if you haven't developed those relationships, you assume the worst. You're like, that person hates me. They don't want to help me. And now you've got this sort of toxicity building in your work environment that's very much like us against them, and we don't want to work together. We don't want to collaborate. But I've always found in every role I've been in, when I've gone I don't want to say out of my way, but when I've gotten really intentional about who are the other people I work with, who are the other people in the other parts of the organization, let's go learn about that.
Investing your time to get to know them a little bit, taking that in purposeful ways.
And what I've found personally, and when I've told other people to do this, is you start doing that, and it doesn't have to take up a lot of time, but you start doing that, again, intentionally as part of a habit. You start to build this connection. People go, wow, we really like working with you. You're like a great partner. Or they go, hey, we've got this like special project. We were wondering if you want to be a part of it. Or, hey, we need help with this presentation to these executives and you've got a part in it. I got invited into a lot more rooms when I was the one who was making these connections with people. And when I've told other people to do that, and it's a professional development activity I'll give to people who kind of seek my advice, is find the 5 people who are leaders in your organization. It doesn't have to be the CEO or CFO, but find 5 people that are farther along in their career that you admire or you're interested in, and reach out to them and just by email and just say, hey, I'm doing this professional development project. It's part of what I'm doing to develop this year. I'm asking 5 leaders one question about their career. I wonder if I could get 15 minutes on your calendar to just talk to you about it. And you don't tell them what the question is. You just tell them, like, I'm going to ask you one question. And they're like, most of the time, most people are going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, 15 minutes, no big deal. They set it up. And then you get in that conversation. You say, what's the one thing that you think has contributed the most to your career success? And then you just stop talking. This is the key. Stop talking and let them talk to you. And they're going to start telling you what they think, and they're going to talk about their career, and they're going to talk about their path. And as they're talking, you're listening, and you're trying to pick up on, the key themes and things like that. And they're going to enjoy that conversation because we love talking about ourselves. We all do. It's just a natural human thing. And when somebody's interested in us and we start talking, we feel good. And then they're going to probably be like, so what are you working on? Right? And you're going to start this conversation that leads to, a bit of a relationship. And now you've got these 5 people out in the organization who now know who you are. They're probably going to continue the conversation. They'll probably give you some advice. If they give you advice, you go take their advice and then you go back to them and say, I took your advice. I did X, Y, and Z. Here were the results. Now you've given yourself a reason to follow up with them. And you start to create these connections. And, if they're like, this has been great, how can I help you? Your answer is, well, who else do you know in this organization that you think I should get to know? And when they say, you should meet this person, say, that'd be great. Would you be interested? Would you possibly send an email and introduce us? That would maybe make it so it's a little bit, they're not blindsided and they're more likely to say yes. That's just networking. And I teach that to individuals, right? I teach that to people who are like, hey, I need to think about my career path and all that kind of stuff. That conversation it sounds, again, when I say it to people, they're like, that's like really straightforward and simple. And like, I know it is.
But that's sort of why it might work too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's having conversations with people when we talk to each other and we share and we're interested and we're curious and we try to help each other. That's how trust starts to form. And when trust starts to form, then you have relationships. And when you have those relationships, you start to get better results out of your teams, out of your organization. And so that's really, that's kind of that piece of when I kind of got to this realization that total rewards isn't going to solve all the problems. We can't just pay more to keep people. It's like, okay, then how do we form a connection that makes them want to stay? How do we build a workplace that they don't want to leave? And to me, a lot of it comes down to these relationships and building those connections through very intentional acts of conversation that become part of your professional development, become part of a talent strategy. Because like I said, your talent mobility starts to take care of itself. If enough people start connecting, they start going, I want to form up this team. I want to get this person on my team. I want to give them this opportunity. That kind of stuff starts to happen organically. And you don't have to just push it down from the top and say, oh, okay, now, because I've seen mentor programs where they assign mentors.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of those, and I've seen organizations try them. And I was just curious about, so what you're talking about, is that something that can be systematized, or if you try to do that, it sort of ruins it?
I feel like a mentee is the person who should choose the mentor, right? I'm not a big fan of the mentor saying like, "Oh, I want to mentor these people. I want them to be my mentees." And I think because you as the person, you have certain like things you're looking for in guidance in somebody to guide you, and when it's been assigned, it's very much like, all right, I'll do this mentor thing because I'm supposed to, and you told me to, and I'm not. I'll try to be interested in this person, but you know, and so I think and that also tends to put the power relationship of the mentors like expected to drive all of it. So what I try to tell people is like, again, these are people who I say do this as part of your professional development. They're the ones reaching out. And, if the person's like, I'm too busy, I don't have time, okay, pick somebody else, right? They're probably not going to give you very good information anyway. But find the people who will take an interest in you, will be interested in helping you. And that's probably going to be a better relationship than somebody who is assigned because it's part of their being a leader in this company.
Mhm, interesting, yeah. Yeah, and I like it because it's so simple, right? It's, pick 5 people, ask for 15 minutes of their time, and just simply ask one question and listen, right? And those are things that, almost anyone that's curious, uh, can do and really start to build those connections.
But you really hit on it, and this is why it's the most important part. I feel like listening is a skill we probably all need the most work on. And that listening part of listening to the other person and letting them talk is one that I find people struggle with. I think a lot of people feel like they need to fill up the time with their own voice. And so my whole approach with the whole introverted networker thing is introverts tend to not want to do that, but they are very willing to listen. And so if you can tap into that strength to be a listener, and as you listen, you're going to get little pieces of information that are helpful to you and what you can do to help the other person, or what sort of advice do you have, or where can the conversation go. But I think too often in organizations we prioritize or hold up the people that are doing all the talking, and we don't celebrate the people that are doing the listening. And that's, I think, a key for most that if I was going to say like where you can see organizations that you're probably starting to see some disengagement, and I don't know, maybe I don't know if you guys get too much into that or you see that in your engagement surveys, that is like, leadership doesn't listen. you know because I mean that's really what it comes down. I mean, I think if there's one thing like a leadership team could do, it's like spend a lot less time talking and a lot more time listening.
Mhm. How can they do that? What are some of the there's obvious ways, like, which we do around surveys and focus groups, but what are other ways they could do that?
I think it's having conversations with people. I know I keep saying having conversations, and it doesn't seem like a really efficient use of time because people are like, well, I have meetings all day and I have people to talk to. When am I going to find time to listen to my employees? Um, you probably will eliminate a lot of your issues and meetings if you spent more time listening to your employees and just, getting in a room with 5 or 10 of them, or 3 or 4 or 1, and say like, tell me what's going on. Tell me what you think. It takes some trust, right? And it takes trust to open up to you and do that. But that's why you have to establish this trust and relationship before you're talking about hard topics, right? So I was talking about the payroll team. Like, I don't want the first time that I talk to the payroll director to be a time when I've got a problem that needs to be solved. I want to talk to them and get to know them and like have a relationship with them. And then when I come and I'm like, hey, it's bad news. Yeah, it's still bad news. They're not going to be happy to hear it, but they're not like, oh my gosh, this guy I don't know just came and wrecked my day. Uh, Same thing with the leaders. Like, you want to talk to people in advance and sort of have that relationship and that sort of trust, so that when you do say, hey, seems like things are kind of going sideways, tell me what's up, what's going on. And if they trust, they're like, I've talked to you before, I know you, It's not like you're just coming to me when you have a problem. I might be more willing to talk to you and tell you what's going on. But the key thing with like listening is you got to do something with it, right? You can't just listen. And I'm sure you see that all the time, right? You go and do the engagement survey, and then people get the results and nothing happens. Well, you were not listening. Like, that is not listening if you're just gonna like take the, do the survey and do nothing. You weren't listening. That's the signal, right? That's what the message it sends is we said we wanted to hear from you, but we don't really want to hear from you.
And it's interesting that whole, one of the things that we do um, around using survey and survey feedback is we really strongly encourage managers and leaders to use it as I call it catalyst for conversation or dialogue, where often what they want to do is they want to take the survey and go, okay, what do we fix? What do we work on? And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, there might be some real red flags, but most of the time with organizations, they're somewhere in the middle. They're not too far off the average on a whole bunch of things. And I often encourage them is just use the survey as a catalyst for dialogue. Sit down with your employees and use the elements of the survey as a time to talk to them. What do they mean by this? If they said, oh, we don't have opportunities or time for professional growth, well, what does that mean? Like, because a manager will often retort, well, they have a budget. We allocate whatever, $2,000 an employee or $1,000, whatever the number is. And then employees say, well, why don't they just use the budget? Well, there must be a reason. So we often, and that's what we always do, is don't think about it as a score or a number or something. That just use it as and they're not all organizations are there. They're still thinking about it as a scorecard and not as a stepping stone for dialogue and for discussion. And I really like having employees also reaching out to leaders, not because then it's not just managers pushing down and having conversations, getting also your suggestion, getting getting employees to reach out to leaders or other people. Doesn't have to be a leader they want to connect with. Maybe someone that's been at the organization for many years, has done many functions, and is just sort of a kingpin in terms of all the information goes through them. They always seem to know what's going on and what's coming up. Connect with that person and do it in that really simple way. So I think that is really that's really interesting. I'm going to wrap up. There's two things I heard, and I'm going to ask you one more question. There's two things I heard. One of them is, counteroffers don't typically work. And sometimes, you got to do them because you got to look like you're seen as doing something. But, and we've experienced that. We've seen that in the workplace. And I think you've seen it over so many years. It just, when managers think that they can save it through a counteroffer, you're just digging yourself in deeper if that's what you're going to try to solve it with. I thought that was really interesting. And the fact how you identified that simple method for frontline, individual contributors, mid-level managers, anybody that wants to think about how to connect better and learn what's out there. Because one of the things that we often see in feedback is employees say they don't know what other opportunities are in their organization, especially in a large organization. They're not aware. They're not the posting may not be as transparent, or it may not be out there, or they don't have chances to be aware of what's coming up. So that method you talked to is one strategy of sort of getting that out there so people can be aware. Or maybe if an opportunity is coming up, hey, I talked to this person a couple of months ago and they might be interested in this role. I'll make sure they're aware of it, type of thing.
The people who get those internal roles, even if they're posted internally, and I've seen this too, and this actually causes more employee frustration because they don't understand this, and nobody's really helping them understand this, is the people who do reach out and get to know and build those relationships, those people get picked for the role and it gets posted, but they've already know who they're picking. That comes across as favoritism. The reality is those people, again, it's not that they aren't qualified. It's not that they're just sucking up or anything. They know people. Like managers, whether you're hired internally or externally, you want to go with the most known quantity. And the most known quantity is the person that you already met and have talked to. So internally, it's the people you know what they did, you're comfortable with them, you maybe worked with them before, you want to get them on your team. You're like, that's the least risky option, right? And it may seem unfair to other people who are like, I didn't know about this, and why did they get to work with them and stuff? And it's like, but that's where you got to tell everybody, like, hey, everybody, this is important to us as a culture. We want a culture of connection. Here's a simple way to do this. And your leaders have to be bought in on this too, by the way, because if your leaders are like, I'm not going to make time for anybody who's lower down in the org chart to come talk to me, that's its own problem, right? I mean, that's a problem you got to work on. Leaders have to be open to talking to people about their careers and opportunities and what their department does.
Yeah.
And
Most are, though. Like most of them,
yeah.
they'd be happy to talk about that. Yeah.
Sure. Most of them usually. But you got to tell the employees, hey, this is important. We want you to do this. And you got to kind of, I mean, it depends on the size of your organization. I'm not saying everybody's got to go talk to the CEO, because then the CEO is going to have this list of 15-minute appointments, right? So that's why I always say it doesn't have to be the top C-suite. It can be other levels of the org. But, you've got to make it a priority. And when you do that and you kind of show people, hey, here's an easy way to do it, and this is important to us, then you're encouraging everybody to do it. It's not like, oh, this one person who happened to figure this out and has been, networking around the org, they seem to get all the opportunities. You're like, well, we tried to show you that. We tried to tell you that was important. You can't just, don't get bitter because somebody else, was better connected than you are.
If someone took the initiative because that's what they wanted. So how do you go about getting that culture working that way? How are things that they could do, or things, that you can get the culture of the organization working that way?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually got, and this is more for like hybrid work, because, one of the things we struggle with now is not everybody's in the office all the time, and, they're not seeing each other, they're not standing desk side. And so how do you create this culture of connection? And I call it sort of the relationship first playbook. And it's kind of how to make hybrid work. And it's 5 things that leaders can do to encourage their team and their employees to connect with other people in the organization, sort of on this way I described to you, on a small, intentional, ongoing basis, so they can start to build these connections with you in the organization. And it doesn't require you being in the office at the same time to do it. So it's kind of a way to do it through, it might just be a phone call, right? It might be a video call. It could be in the office if they're in the office, but you don't have to put on a all office happy hour to foster connection, right? If you want to, great. But teach people how to do this in between those events so that they can kind of network in their own schedule. I say on your own schedule, in your own space, with your own style, because those big office events, a lot of people aren't even comfortable at those office events, right? Your introverts are like, I'm here, but I'm not really going to go talk to anybody outside my team. So there's sort of 5 different suggestions I have in that. It's a guide that I have that, be happy to give you and your listeners a link to that if they're interested in that. That really just kind of says, for a manager, here's things you can do to encourage your team to go out and build these relationships in a very intentional way.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think it would be great if you could share that with us, and it'll also give us a chance to learn a little bit more about what you do. The last question I have, and then I just want to ask how people get a hold of you. If you were the CEO of a 1,000-person company, and because you did talk about listening, and it's one of the things we're not doing really well, and it might feed into what we've talked about here. But if you're the CEO of a 1,000-person company, what's the first thing you would do to change how the company listens to people? What would you?
I would tell my direct reports that they needed to, spend probably at least a day a week just sitting and listening to their direct reports. And then their direct reports need to go to their direct reports. And there's no agenda. There's no like, bring this back to me and tell me, what they said. We're not like taking down notes, but really just go and sit and say, hey, tell me about what's going on. Like, when you come to work, how's work going? And I think if my pushback was, well, they don't talk to us, right? I'd be like, okay, well, that's our problem, right? If they're not going to share, they don't trust us. So we need to, in order to start to build trust, we're going to have to kind of ask them about, what's going on with them, how are things going, and just, again, no action, no reaction, just let them talk and start to understand what some of the issues are. And really just kind of prioritize that listening is, I don't ever see it, but I'd almost say like listening is a core value. Like I'm not ever sure I've seen listening as a core value for any organization. And I would say listening is our core value, that it is one of the most important things we can do. Now, look, every company's listening to its customers. That's easy. But listening to its employees and really trying to hear what they're saying and understand it doesn't mean you have to do everything they ask. It just means you have to listen and understand where they're coming from. So yeah, I think I would do that. I think, the core value thing is something that I kind of just dawned on me as we were talking. But I think if you did that, you'd be like, this is so critical to us. It's one of our core values. And doing that, I think would start to open up some of that trust and hopefully get people talking.
Love it. I love that. Listening as a core value. It's fantastic. Greg, thank you very much. Been fantastic. I've got some really good nuggets out of here. Please just share with us, how do people get a hold of you? How's the best way?
Yeah. So my website is retentionandrewards.com. So all spelled out, real easy there. So that's my website. I'm on LinkedIn under my name. So Greg, it's actually Greg S as in Sam Roche, or S as in Sean. And so if you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll see it'll say like Greg, the Introverted Networker. So you'll know that's me. And I post every day about networking and building more connected workplaces. And that's a good place besides my website. So one of those two places is probably the normal central place to find me. And yeah, reach out, email, phone call, whatever. I'm generally pretty easy to get in touch with.
Excellent. Well, Greg, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
All right, great. Thanks for having me on, Sean.
Thanks for listening to Voice Activated. If you've heard something that got you thinking, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Talk about it, put it into play. That's how better workplaces get built. When you're ready to move from insight into action, head over to TalentMap.com. You'll find tools, resources, and strategies to help you lead better with clarity, empathy, and impact. And make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any more real conversations with leaders who know that some of the best ideas for change don't come from the top, but from those employees closest to the work.